Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Have kind of a bittersweet video today. If I time this correctly, this will air on September 3rd, 2025, which is the first anniversary of Paul Harrell's death. And it's very bittersweet. It's very bitter because he was taken from us before his time. He was only 58 years old. And, you know, he wasn't a kid, but that's awfully young these days for somebody to die. Most people live a lot longer than that. And we thought he would have a lot more years with us. And it's sweet because I'm reminiscing, and I hope you'll join me in reminiscing about all he meant to us and all that he gave us and his great legacy. I feel kind of bad filming this indoors. It's hot outside, so I don't want to go outside, but I should have filmed in some natural environment with some trees behind me or something, as Paul would have done. And I'll get back to filming outdoors when the cooler weather gets here, but I do not like this summer heat, so I'm here indoors. I may be able to put some kind of filter on this, or so. Let me just... Hey, there we go. All right, so it's just like being outdoors. It's perfect. Well, guys, I want you to join me in reminiscing about Paul Harrell and about celebrating his life and mourning his passing. It is fitting that we would mourn him because he's a person who's worth missing and worth remembering.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa.
Well, that's too damn bad. Keep digging. All right, you're just gonna have to imagine trees behind me from now on. Paul was, of course, one of my big inspirations for starting the channel. The channel name is a clue, isn't it? The idea with this channel is very much to continue his style of presentations in as much as I can. I don't have his personality. I don't have his resources. I don't have all of his knowledge. I try to do presentations which are similar to his, but I can't entirely. I just try to do what I can. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about why I started the channel, about my inspiration. There's several sources of inspiration, but one in particular. If I time this correctly, this video will be released on September 3rd, 2025, which is the first anniversary of Paul Harrell's death, which for me was a very sad day. Now, I had over a year to prepare for that. He announced, I think in July of 23, that he had pancreatic cancer. And when I heard that announcement, I was, number one, shocked, but number two, very worried and dismayed, because I'm aware that pancreatic cancer is almost always terminal. People who have pancreatic cancer, as a rule, do not beat it. They do not survive very long. However, I understand that's primarily because it's very difficult to detect. Doctors usually don't detect it early, so it's in one of its later stages by the time it's detected, and as a result, it's difficult to treat. Well, Paul's cancer, he said, was detected early. How early, I don't know, but earlier than usual. So I really had a lot of hope that he might survive it, or at least that he would live several more years and be able to give us several more years of content, and of course, to enjoy his life for several more years. I mean, if he had announced that he had cancer and that he was retiring from the channel and he was just going to focus on, you know, whatever it is that he wanted to do to make him happy and not going to make any more YouTube content, I would have understood, you know, wouldn't have objected to that at all. But he made it clear that he wanted to keep making content as long as he could. So I was really hoping that at the very least we would get a few more years of content from him. Alex Trebek had pancreatic cancer, and he kept doing Jeopardy for quite a few years. I want to say about 5 years. I could be wrong. But he lived a very long time after the diagnosis. And I was sort of hoping that it would be the same in Paul's case, but it wasn't. One of my other, I won't call him a hero or an icon, but somebody else that I admire and respect, Bill Hicks, comedian Bill Hicks, also died of pancreatic cancer in 1994. Yeah, I had some familiarity with the disease already and with how frequently it is terminal. There's some kinds of cancer that people beat pretty routinely. Skin cancers, lots of people survive them. Colon cancers, lots of people survive them. A bunch of different cancers of the bladder, stomach, whatever. Lots of people do survive these now. Breast cancer, lots of women survive that. Testicular cancer for men, prostate cancer for men. But pancreatic cancer is one of those cancers that very few people survive. So I was very, very, very worried and dismayed when I heard that Paul had pancreatic cancer. And because I knew that he was ill, obviously I had some time to prepare for the idea that he might not be with us much longer. The announcement of his death was not particularly sudden. After he announced his illness, he continued appearing in YouTube videos, and really there was no change. And he said he didn't want anybody asking about cancer, so I didn't email him and ask him about it. I didn't mention it in the comments section. I tried to respect his wishes there. But when new videos would come out, I'd look at him. Does he look okay? He looked like he was as healthy as ever. I didn't notice any change. But by that October, I guess, by the time he did his Halloween special, he had broken his hip, and that was an obvious change. He couldn't hide that. The fact that he was walking first with a cane and then with a crutch. And his health obviously deteriorated after that. It was kind of obvious on film that he wasn't as healthy as he had been, wasn't feeling as well. And then along about that January of 24, either very late December, I believe it was early January. Well, in December, he recorded a couple of videos, and in one of them, he said he was turning over the channel to his brother. And the other one, he announced to everyone that he had died, although we didn't see that video for about 10 more months. But yeah, in that winter of 24, he announced that he was turning over the channel to his brother Roy because he was too ill to continue. And it was not clear from that video if we would see him again on YouTube at all. A lot of people assumed that meant that he was retiring and he would not be back. Some people, I was one of them, said, now hold on, he didn't say he wasn't coming back or he wouldn't be in videos, just that Roy was taking over the channel. But, Paul might still be in some videos. And as it turns out, we did get him in more videos, which was great. He appeared off and on in videos for the next few months, but his health was clearly declining. So every time he was on video again, he kind of looked a little worse, and looked like he was feeling poorly. And he made it very clear in some videos that he couldn't be in the whole thing, and he couldn't walk around up and down the range, and he was going to have to film sitting down. He could only do one take. He only had the energy to stay on camera for a few minutes and speak. So yeah, we sadly, we watched his health decline over the course of several months, and frequently he'd go weeks without being in a video at all. We'd be getting content from Roy, and generally no health updates from Roy. And I'm not blaming Roy for that, because I'm sure Roy said whatever on camera Paul wanted him to. Paul made it clear that he didn't want people prying into his personal life or asking about his health. So I'm sure Roy disclosed exactly what Paul told him to, and no more and no less. Paul was very much in control of that information. And he was in many ways a rather private person. He let us in to a great deal of his personal life. He told us things about his family and where he lived, and personal stories about growing up and being in the Army and things like that. He let us in to a great deal of his personal life, but not everything, and I wouldn't expect him to tell us everything. It was none of our business. He shared as much as he wanted to, and I trust that he was wise enough to know what he should share and what he shouldn't. But over the months, we got some health updates in that we would see Paul occasionally, and we could tell that he was doing badly, but we weren't really informed about how things were going. I became more and more concerned with him as we got into the summer. There was a long stretch when he wasn't in any videos at all. But then he started to appear in some videos late in the summer, and I really got the impression that he had bounced back some, that he was getting to feel better. And I let myself hope that maybe he would still make a recovery, or at the very least that he might make enough of a recovery that he could continue enjoying life and bringing us videos for maybe another year or two. Just a few days before he died, Roy released a video in which they were at the range together. It was great to see Paul out enjoying himself. He clearly was in very poor health there. And then on September 3rd, 2024, Roy released the video announcing Paul's death, in which Paul announces his own death. And it was a very sad day for me. I'm sure much more sad for Paul's family and his friends. I did not know him terribly well. I would love to tell you that I was his close personal friend, but I wasn't. I didn't know him well. He was friendly to me, and he spoke to me, and I'm very glad to say that he seemed to like me, or at least tolerate me. And maybe if he'd had more time, we would have become friends eventually. He and John became friends. They met at a gun show and then met there again the next year. And then he sort of became part of the crew. Maybe that would have happened with me. Well, I probably wouldn't have been part of the crew because we don't really live in the same part of the country. But maybe we would have had some kind of further association if he hadn't died. I don't know. But the point is that even though I didn't know him terribly well, and I'm sure I wasn't saddened in the same way that his close family and friends were, yeah, that was very sad for me. And really at that time, I still had no thoughts of starting a YouTube channel. It was only, I have been disappointed with how Roy was running things on the channel. Roy's earlier videos are pretty bad if you go back and watch those, and they have lots of deficits in terms of picture and sound quality, editing, and so on. But, he was just figuring it out, and he did eventually get a lot better. The production values got better. He seemed to be more comfortable on camera, so that was great. And I sort of held my breath to see how he would run the channel without Paul's input at all. And by the time I saw his couple of holiday specials at the end of the year, that was pretty much what led me to decide somebody ought to try to keep doing Paul Harrell style content, at least, to the extent that he's able, because Roy is not really keeping a lot of those traditions alive. And I'm somebody, so, it's easy to say somebody ought to do it and then not do it yourself. So took the responsibility to do it myself. So I try to do reviews and videos that are sort of in the same vein as Paul Harrell. Obviously, it's not the same. He and I don't have exactly the same sense of humor. We don't have the same presentation style. We don't have the same knowledge, training, experience. So I do my best, but but I'm no Paul Harrell. But I guess I'd like to talk about how I discovered Paul Harrell, because so many people over the years discovered him at different times in different ways, different videos, and they sort of took different things from his videos. There are people who were watching him way back over 10 years ago in his earliest videos. And my memory of it is that I discovered him about 10 years ago. I discovered him in 2015. Some friends of mine kept posting links to this one video of his, and I finally went and checked it out. Well, that video was actually posted in 2017, if I recall correctly. So even though my memory of it is that I was watching his videos back in 2015, it couldn't have been, because this is How to Spot a Fake Expert. He posted that video in 2017, and that was the first one I watched. So that must have been the first time I watched him. It must have been 2017. And some of my friends were telling me, oh, you've got to see this. It's amazing. It's so good. And I watched it. I don't think I even watched the whole thing. It wasn't for me. I kind of watched a few minutes and I thought, okay, who is this guy? He just sits at a table and talks. I kind of don't care. I don't care what his opinion is. I'm sure he has great opinions, but so what? It wasn't terribly interesting to me. I didn't find his presentation style that great. I didn't find him all that interesting. There was sort of nothing all that interesting about it. And I don't remember what was the next video of his that I watched, but you know how it is. You click on something on YouTube and you get recommended more of that thing. And so I started watching. Occasionally I'd click on some other video, Paul's top 5 guns for home defense, or Paul's top 5 guns for the zombie apocalypse, or whatever. And I decided, hey, I kind of like this guy, kind of like some of his presentations. I found them maybe a little dry. Some of the first few that I watched, maybe I thought were a little boring. I don't remember exactly which ones they were. But over the years, I tried more of his videos, and by about 2020, I was hooked. I would watch one occasionally before that. And about 2020, frankly, I think maybe that's when the channel really got good. Not that it wasn't good before, but like that's when it hit this real peak of quality. It was during the pandemic. He was getting lots of new subscribers. Lots of people were asking questions and saying, hey, I'm new, give me information. And I really thought the information he was giving was terrific. It was fantastic. And so I was kind of glued to his channel, and I would go back and watch all his old content and pour through all the old stuff and kind of devour all that content. And I discovered, wow, some of these old videos are really, really good. And what can you use this cover? Will your bookshelf in your home stop bullets? Will building materials stop bullets? Will your home appliances stop bullets? Will a log cabin stop bullets? I thought that's pretty cool. That's very interesting. I loved a lot of his advice for people during the pandemic. If you're a pandemic gun buyer, here's what you should do. If you're trying to train during the pandemic, here's what you should do. I loved some of his workarounds. Hey, we're not allowed to say COVID, but we can say beer, right? I love some of the tongue-in-cheek things that he would do and say. He clearly had a sense of humor. I just really came to appreciate his kind of no-nonsense style. So many people, gun tubers, are all about flash and, hey, this gun is really cool. Well, I'm sure it is really cool, but it's also $4,000. Most people don't have that kind of money laying around. And Paul was happy to review a $400 gun and say, hey, if you buy that $4,000 gun, that's a really good gun, but here's the $400 version that maybe you can actually afford. And it still works. Maybe you can't afford a $400 gun. Maybe you've got a gun that you inherited and it's not much of a gun, but actually it can still be useful. I love that even though he didn't suggest that people should cheap out and spend as little money as possible on firearms and defensive gear, he also acknowledged the fact that some people just have very little or no money to spend, and he would much rather help somebody acquire a box of 32 Smith & Wesson longs so at least he can fire the old gun he's got, or 28 gauge shotgun ammo or whatever, rather than telling him, oh, you should just throw that away and get yourself a brand new $1,000 pistol. Well, person doesn't have that kind of money. Oh, you don't have that kind of money? Well, you should just not have a gun then. Because that is kind of the way that some gun tubers approach this question. If you don't have X amount of dollars to spend, you sort of don't deserve to defend your life, which to me is silly. That's very misguided. But I love that Paul would give very practical advice, even for people who had very little access to training or very little access to money or other resources. Maybe they had little access to legal acquisition of firearms. People who live in places where maybe you can keep the gun you have, but you have trouble acquiring a new one, or you have very limited choices when it comes to acquiring a new one. Like, hey, in this jurisdiction, it's easy to buy black powder firearms, muzzle loaders, but anything cartridge firing is difficult. Okay, well, he had lots of videos about black powder and about cap and ball revolvers, and he didn't recommend them for defense, but he did make it clear, if this is all you have got or all you can get, it can be viable, it can work, which is something that very few gun tubers want to talk about or will acknowledge. So I absolutely applauded him for that. And I try to do the same on my channel. Hey, I recommend that if you need a pistol, maybe you go out and spend $500 on a Glock, because Glock makes really good pistols, although they're not the only ones. There are lots of other good ones. But if you can't afford to do that, if $200 is your budget, we're going to find you something that works within your budget. And if $100 is your budget, I mean, back in the 90s, you had more options. You can probably still find something viable for $100, but you can't be picky. You might have to shop around for a while before you find something for $100. But I try to have the same kind of approach that Paul had, which is, even if you're on a very limited budget, we're going to try to find something that works for you. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't spend more than $200. It's easy to say, well, hey, could you defend yourself adequately with a budget of $200? Yeah. Get a Mossberg 88 shotgun or get a high point pistol, or there are a bunch of other possibilities in that $200 range. Okay, well, if that's adequate, then you just shouldn't spend any more, right? If you spend any more, then you would just be wasting your money. Well, not necessarily. You can get a lot of extra value for some extra money. If you can bump that up to $400 or $500 or $600, you can get something much better. But if you can't afford $500 or $600, you don't have to despair. You can still come up with something adequate. On the other hand, there is a law of diminishing returns there. If we bump the budget up from $500 to $2,000, can you get something better for $2,000? Yeah. Is it materially better? Probably not. I mean, for most people, most of the time, if we're considering something like a third gen Glock, a Model 17 or 19 or something like that. Well, if we increase your budget, and let's say it's as a used gun, it's a $400 or $500 gun, whatever. If we increase your budget, are you going to get something vastly better than that? No. That's about as good as it gets, practically speaking. Yeah, you can go buy a Lago Alien, but is that better than the Glock for defense? Probably not. You can go buy a H&K Mark 23 SOCOM pistol, and they're really cool. Is that going to defend you better than the Glock? No, I don't think so. At some point, you can spend more money and you get some cool features or a neat looking gun or a gun that's hypothetically more accurate or whatever, but is it really better for your purpose? Probably not. But anyway, that's one of the things that was refreshing about Paul's videos. It's one of the things that he kind of helped us keep in mind, that you don't have to spend a huge amount of money to be protected adequately. And while he had some expensive, fancy guns, his go-to guns were pretty much plain, workhorse, inexpensive guns. He had a Ruger 1022 on which he'd screwed a peep sight and stuck some duct tape under it to hold it in place. And it, what is that, a $200 used rifle? His go-to pump guns were a Mossberg, was a 500 or 590, which is not a cheap pump gun, but it's not $1,000 Benelli or $1,500 Benelli or Beretta or something like that. It's kind of a plain workhorse gun. His preferred home defense firearm was a Model 97 pump, and one that wasn't pristine, not really that collectible. Somebody cut the barrel down, but it was plain and simple, and it worked. He had a Model 11 Remington, a cheap old copy of an Auto 5. And those are not terribly collectible or valuable or whatever, but they are workhorse guns that, even though they're 100 years old, they still work now. They work beautifully, and they'll bring home rabbits and turkeys and anything you can imagine over and over every season. So yeah, he had the means to go get something newer and fancier, and he just didn't bother because he didn't need to, because he had what he needed. He didn't feel the need to go spend money on something superfluous. His go-to AR was his A1, and he could have gone and bought a Daniel Defense for a couple $1,000s. Why? He had an old A1 with a Bushmaster lower and a Colt upper, kind of mismatched, kind of a Frankenstein gun, and with a pretty terrible trigger, but it worked. It was accurate, it was reliable. Why change it? It wouldn't shoot the heavier bullets, it wouldn't shoot 62 grains or some of the heavier bullet loads that are available now. But it did what he wanted it to do for the most part, so there was no reason to upgrade that. Another rifle wouldn't really have been an upgrade for him. He was a guy who really satisfied himself with fairly simple things that worked. With cars, it was a little different. He wanted something a little fancier there. He liked his classic cars that were beautifully restored, and they really performed. But when it came to guns, he had enough performance that the gun didn't have to perform that well. His shooting skills were really good, and he could take a mediocre gun and make it perform well. That's all he needed. And he sort of encouraged us, the rest of us, to do the same. I don't think it's a coincidence that it was about in 2020 that he started doing a lot of the holiday specials, and those became probably my all-time favorite videos. Loved his Halloween specials. I loved his Christmas specials. He did an occasional, like an Easter special. Those were silly and fun. They were great. And the best of all were the Thanksgiving specials. And I don't think I discovered the Thanksgiving specials until 2022. Maybe I discovered them in 21. I don't remember. But I remember I discovered, oh, he's been doing Thanksgiving specials. And I went back and watched all of them, kind of binged all of them. And those are probably his very, very best content ever. And I miss those most of all from him. And I'll be trying to do a Thanksgiving special like his this year because I was really disappointed with Roy's last year. Again, if Roy hadn't been such a disappointment, I wouldn't have bothered putting together a YouTube channel. But Roy has been a big disappointment, so here I am trying to take up the banner, and I don't know if I'm doing it well or not. But I'm not willing to sit back and complain about somebody else's work when I'm not willing to put in the work myself. So here I am putting in some work. Hey guys, I'm interrupting my own video. I needed to cut in this segment because I realized when I filmed my video about the first anniversary of Paul's death, I forgot a couple of things that I wanted to say. I'm wearing a different Boom shirt. Hope that's okay. I'll try to be brief. I was recently scrolling on one of Paul's old videos, and he was telling one of his Joe stories. And for those of you familiar with his channel, you probably remember his Joe stories very well. But I saw somebody comment this, and I thought it was worth repeating because it is kind of mind-blowing. I cannot believe that Joe outlived Paul. That just goes to show you that God's sense of irony must be completely bonkers. That's how it is. I also was reminded recently that a year ago when Paul died, I contacted a friend of mine, and I mean, I don't think I contacted him about this in particular, but I happened to talk to him shortly after that and happened to mention Paul Harrell having died. And the friend didn't know who that was. And I said, well, he's a YouTuber that I like a lot, and he was a Marine. And the person to whom I was talking was also a Marine. He was a fellow who had been in the Corps for about 8 or 10 years. He left as a staff sergeant. I don't know what all jobs he did in the Corps. He had been infantry. He had been a drill instructor for a while. He was a pretty hardcore Marine for a long time. He was trained with Recon Marines, but I don't think he ever actually joined Recon. But, even though he hasn't been in the Corps for a long time, being a Marine is a big part of his identity. And I was telling him about Paul having been a Marine and, of course, also a U.S. Army soldier. And I sort of jokingly made a reference to the Marine Corps hymn, if the Army and the Navy ever look on heaven's scene, they will find the streets are guarded by United States Marines. And I was joking with this friend of mine. I said, well, it's a shame, it's a tragedy that Paul did so many good things in his life, and he made the world a better place, and he did his duty, and he was such a good person, and now he's gone off to heaven, and he doesn't even get to rest. He has to guard the streets for eternity. He pulls guard duty every day as a Marine, having to guard the streets of heaven. Doesn't seem fair. And my staff sergeant friend replied, he has help. Which is, of course, true. I guess he has about the finest assistants on guard duty that anybody could desire. Hard to imagine having better help on your guard duty than a bunch of Marines. So, Semper Fi. I don't know if Paul ever understood I mean, he was a smart guy and he was capable of a great deal of understanding, but some of these things are harder. Some of these things are harder to see, harder to notice than others. I don't know if he ever really came to understand how much he meant to some of his viewers. There are a lot of casual viewers who enjoyed his channel and watched an occasional video. I still see people commenting, oh wait, Paul Harrell died? I mean, he's been dead almost a year now. And a lot of people were such casual viewers, they didn't even realize that he died. But a great many of his viewers were much more loyal. And I don't know if he understands how he affected their lives, how he touched their lives. So many people in the comments section talk about how much they learned from him and continue to learn from him, and how he inspired them, and how much entertainment he brought them with his holiday specials, and how they've become a big, important part of the holiday for those people. I have been reading through his comment sections, and it's interesting and gratifying to see how many people refer to him as an uncle like I do. They refer to him as Uncle Paul. Apparently he did not, I'm not the only one whose life he touched in the same way. But he was such a father figure or a grandfatherly figure or sort of an uncle figure to so many people. I think a lot of young men are sort of basing their ideas of masculinity off of Paul Harrell, and you could do a lot worse, especially young men who have grown up without father figures in their lives. And Paul, as I said before, reminded me a whole lot of my own grandfather, even though he was of a very different generation than Paul. But they had similar kind of tastes and similar personalities. They're similar kind of guys. My grandfather also hunted with a Model 97 Winchester and a Model 11 Remington. So take that for what it's worth. Although he never owned a 10/22 and he wasn't fond of hunting with lever guns. Paul really liked 444 Marlin, and my grandfather wasn't a fan of that. My grandfather liked optics on rifles, whereas Paul liked iron sights. Okay. Paul was also a big handgunner, and my grandfather was not a handgunner. He only in his life ever owned, I think, about 3 pistols, and not all at the same time. And I only ever saw him use one of them. He had a Ruger Mark I that he would carry around in the woods, and that was frequently his constant companion. But he wasn't much of a pistolero. He was more of a rifleman. Anyway, so Paul for me was, I don't want to say father figure. He was somebody who reminded me of these male figures in my family, reminded me somewhat of my dad and my grandfather, especially my grandfather. And I, in some ways, had kind of a similar relationship with him, although, of course, he and I didn't know each other well. But I mean, the Paul that I would see on screen, my understanding of who he was and what I could learn from him, similar to my father and my grandfather. And a lot of people felt that way. I see comments occasionally from female viewers of the channel, but it's 99% guys. It's 99% male. And some of them are old guys who are older than Paul, but they learned a lot from him. And many of them are young guys who said, hey, you inspired me to buy my first pistol or my first rifle, or go hunting for the first time, or whatever. And I learned a lot from you. And so I don't know if he ever appreciated just how much he taught people and how much he touched their lives. I think he understood that. And I don't know if he ever really understood, if we ever communicated to him, how much we loved him and how much we loved having him in our lives and having his channel in our lives, and how much that meant to us, because it was a big deal for a lot of people, for me and for a lot of other people. But we have now been without Paul for about a year. I think it's very, very sad to see what's become of his channel in the last year. I'm glad it's still going. I'm glad we still have it, and that Roy is still producing some content. And it may be that he's doing his very best, but there's still a great deal missing from the channel. Anyway, if you never met Paul Harrell in person, I would say you missed out. But when you watch his videos, he was very much in person like he was in the videos. So they're a very good representation of who he was, or at least the version of him that I met in person. And if I could talk to him again, I would thank him for all that he did for us, bringing us lots of entertainment and lots of information and keeping us grounded and reminding us you don't have to spend a lot of money to defend yourself, and reminding us that the practice and the training we do should be sort of grounded in the real world and not in some airsoft fantasy. He didn't mind indulging in fantasies occasionally. Okay, what if the end of the world happened? What kind of gun should you have? Okay, why not? It doesn't hurt anything to speculate about that. But for the most part, he was interested in really practical applications. Hey, if you need a firearm to defend your life, what kind of firearm do you need and what kind of training do you need? Let's talk about, let's reject this fantasy scenario where you've got a SWAT team, 3 to 5 people storming your house with overwhelming force. That's fact one. He rejected that idea that that was likely to happen to very many people. But he embraced the reality that what is reasonably likely to happen is that somebody might try to force entry to your home because he believes you're not home, or because he doesn't care if you're home and he wants to hurt you. Maybe he has something against you personally, or maybe he just wants to hurt someone, or maybe he just wants to take something and he doesn't care who gets in his way. Or maybe he knows you personally and he wants to hurt you personally in some way. Unfortunately, this happens to lots and lots of people. And there are some very simple, basic things we can do to help prevent tragedy in those cases. Or you're going to the ATM, which almost all of us do at least occasionally, and somebody decides to approach you there and try to hurt you in order to take something valuable from you. Again, what should you do? How can you avoid that situation? If you can't avoid it, what's the best thing you can do to survive it? The idea that you need some kind of fancy carbine and an operator vest is kind of silly. You need a vest that holds 10 magazines, and you need night vision and weapon-mounted lights and so on. All of those things can be useful, but do most people really need those? No. When someone comes around and tries to hurt them, a simple firearm that's well used, judiciously used, and maybe a flashlight, that's probably all you need. Do you need 30 or 50 or 100 rounds? No, probably not. Odds are you can resolve the situation with just a few rounds. Frequently, you'll resolve the situation without firing at all, which is great. And if you do have to fire, you probably won't have to fire more than a few rounds. And so he focused on those scenarios that were most likely. Now, he fully acknowledged sometimes there may come a day when you need 30 rounds because you're faced with some extraordinary threat with rioters or something like that who wish to do you harm, a huge mob of people who might want to harm you. But again, such a thing would very much be the exception rather than the rule. Most of the time when people need to use firearms to defend themselves, it's not a situation like that at all. It's a situation in which 1 or 2 rounds is probably going to be good enough. And so he kept all of us sort of rooted in the real world and not in John Wick fantasies. And I think that's extremely, extremely valuable, because he's one of the few gun tubers who was doing that, who was telling people, hey, John Wick movies are fun, but here's what really is going to happen. Either you're not going to need your firearm at all, or if you do, more than likely when you need it, it's going to be a matter of very limited firing. You won't have to do a lot of shooting. So many people get fixated on the idea that they need some kind of super tactical firearm, something that's black or digital camo that's marketed as a tactical firearm. No, your old side-by-side shotgun can do a really great job of defending your life. Your old blued revolver can do a great job of defending your life. It doesn't have to be something that's marketed as tactical, or that most people would agree is tactical. A lot of people would be looking to trade in granddad's old 30-30 and get an AR. Well, AR-15s are great rifles, but you know that old Model 94 is a great rifle too. If you've already got a Model 94 that works, why not just stick with it? For most people, most of the time, it probably will be just as good as a modern AR, and maybe better for defense, but whatever. But I love that Paul would give people that advice. He would let them know, you don't have to have the latest, greatest thing. You don't have to have something really high tech or fancy or tactical to defend your life. even if the gun is not really marketed as a tactical or defense-oriented product, it can still be terrific in that role. So I did love seeing that from him, and I found it very refreshing. He was one of the only gun tubers who would do that, who would focus on something practical rather than on something cool. And I'm sure it's something that cost him a lot of subscribers and viewers over the years. If he'd focused on the coolest, latest thing, the most high-tech firearm with all the gadgets on it, he probably would have had more viewers and his channel would have seemed more exciting. It also would have been less useful for people. And so I'm very grateful to him that he created content that was so useful for so many people. And he was one of the only gun tubers who kind of stayed rooted in reality and didn't allow himself to indulge in a lot of silly fantasies that, yes, are entertaining, but that don't make people safer, that don't make them more able to defend themselves, keep themselves safe. Paul announced his illness in July, I think, of 23, and I had already been very interested in going to meet him when he did an appearance at a gun show. I was thinking sometime I might travel to Oregon, even though Oregon is a long way from me. And after he announced his illness, I decided the next time he appears at a gun show, if he appears at another one, I'm going. I'll take a few days off work if I have to. I'll go to Oregon. I've got to meet him. And it just so happened that his next gun show appearance, which I think was his last, happened to be much closer to me than Oregon. It was the only time he appeared at a gun show, I think, outside of Oregon, and it just happened to be much closer to my home than any place in Oregon. So that worked out really well, and I was able to go see him. Very happy that I could go see him. Anyway, Paul's been gone for a year, and we miss him very much, but he is still with us in his videos. And I hope that we can keep his memory and his spirit alive. And I hope that we can treat each other the way he would have treated us. Anyway, that was Paul.